I'm joined now by the co-founders of Indivisible and the organizers of the No Kings protest, Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin. Thank you so much for coming on. First and foremost, the question on everyone's mind here is, given the huge success of not just the first No Kings, but the second No Kings, which is now among the most the biggest protest in the history of this country, will there be a third No Kings protest?
Leah, you want to take it?
Well, there will be protests in the future. Right now, what we're focusing on is how do we take the energy that has come out of No Kings, the first and second one, and how do we make sure that we're taking that energy and directing it towards the folks across American society who are enabling Donald Trump's consolidation of power, making sure that we are collectively applying our leverage, the leverage of the 7 million people who marched in as consumers, as organizers, as people who are out in our communities and have ways to defy and push back against the regime.
And check it out, Brian. Think about No Kings 2 as part of a trend. It didn't come out of nowhere. In April for Hands Off, we had 3 million people in 1,300 events. In June for the first No Kings, we had 5 million people at 2,100 events. On Saturday, we had more than 7 million people at more than 2,700 events. 3 million, 5 million, 7 million. Connect the dots and then extrapolate outwards. Where are we going? We're going up. We're getting to 3.5% of the population, which in the US context is about 11 or 12 million people. We're making steady progress and we're going to get there. But it's not just one day marches. It's important for any mature yet growing movement to expand on its tactics and engage in real time. So we've got to define this win, prevent the MAGA regime from defining it away from what reality was, and then we've got to build on it.
So you had mentioned tactics there. I'm curious, as we move forward, as the left becomes more comfortable in this space of organizing. We saw the first instances of that, obviously, with the first iteration of No Kings and Hands Off. Now the second one was much larger. We've also seen instances where the left has organized in terms of preventing Kimmel from being thrown off the air.
Yeah.
So what are the actual demands that we're looking for as we go further and further into this process?
I think we need to recognize that the front lines of this fight are not just in the administration or the regime. They're not just in Congress or on Capitol Hill. They're not just in the state legislatures. One of the defining aspects of this, as any authoritarian regime, is that they're going after the pillars of democracy: media, universities, law firms, businesses. You mentioned Disney and Kimmel. I think this is such a great case in point of what people power can do in this moment to shore up those institutions. I think we ought to be looking at our economic power, at boycotts, at other tools to encourage these institutions in real time to back off from kowtowing to this administration, to their threats, and stand firm against what is an authoritarian regime. But we don't do that in the abstract. We do that when the threat comes. I think that's why the Disney campaign was so effective. It wasn't hypothetical, it wasn't philosophical. Threat occurred, Disney capitulated, mass movement pushed back, Disney reversed course. I think that's a model for things to come.
I got to ask, what was your reaction after 7 million Americans took to the streets, 2,700 communities, not just big cities like LA and Chicago and DC and New York, but also small communities that had 3, 4, 5,000 people in the entire city or town came out and made their voices heard. And the president of the United States' reaction to all of this was to post an AI video of him dropping shit onto protesters. Your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, I think it was a funny transition because the first thing that happened was the White House spokesperson gave a quote saying, "Oh, who cares?" And then later that night, you've got Donald Trump rage posting this scatological video of himself declaring himself a king and indicating that he would like to dump shit on American cities and American protesters. And so I think we got under his skin. I think we got under his skin a little bit here. And I think that it really goes to the basic theory of what we were doing collectively, which was that we were bringing together the biggest possible group of people who could collectively stand against Donald Trump. We were leaning into our values, into our commitment to American values and to protecting our neighbors. And he doesn't have a response to that. And so instead, what he does is he rage posts. And I think that's a pretty indicative demonstration of where we are in this moment.
But it's not even just about Trump. Like, think about how the entire regime reacted in the couple of weeks leading up to this. First, we were going to be bloody Marxists at fellow Americans' throats. And then, after it went off without a hitch, not a single incident of violence reported in more than 2,700 events, Then we were just weirdo nudists. That's who it was out there. And
Right.
then it wasn't that. No, they were just old fogies. And now the place where you see them landing, Brian, is that it didn't actually exist.
Right.
It wasn't important. It wasn't real. Just move on. And I got to say, it makes sense that they're between a rock and a hard place. This is an unpopular regime that just witnessed, again, the largest peaceful protest in all of American history. And they're scrambling to figure out a way to spin this that it doesn't matter for them. Tough shit. It matters for them. It's a bad sign of things that come for them, and it's a good sign for what comes for our democracy.
I do want to note that while you were talking, Leah, I did look up the word scatological, and that is officially the nicest way I've heard anybody describe Donald Trump posting an AI video of him dumping human shit onto protesters. So good on you there. I do have to ask, in general, why does it matter when millions upon millions upon millions of Americans take to the streets? And I ask that especially in light of the fact that this seems to be an administration that, even if not in reality, in their desire, hopes to be kind of beyond the reach of any popular pressure. And so why is it important that millions of people take to the streets right now?
Yeah. Well, I would go back to kind of the 101 of like, how does an authoritarian regime function and how does an authoritarian regime stop? How do nonviolent social movements have an impact, right? Because Donald Trump absolutely intends to govern as an authoritarian. He does not care about the fact that there is broad-based popular opposition to what
Yeah.
he is doing. But for Donald Trump to effectively do what he does, a large number of people and institutions have to collaborate. They have to go along with things that they know are wrong or illegal. They have to fold into the broader authoritarian effort in order for him to successfully consolidate power. And right now, we are in a moment in society when everyone, literally everyone, is making decisions on a daily basis about whether they are speaking out, whether they are protesting, whether they are pushing back in their own jobs or in their positions as members of a church, members of a university, members of a professional association. Literally, like wherever you are, you're making decisions on a daily basis about how much you're going along with this and how much you're pushing back. And so a protest like this, it's not aimed at like causing Donald Trump to have this ghosts of
Right.
Christmas future kind of change of heart and
Right.
suddenly become a good person. It's aimed at the many, many people from businesses like Disney to elected officials at the state to local to federal level to your minister or your member, your university president, or really any decision maker who's thinking about how much am I going along and how much am I pushing back. And what it does is it disrupts the sense that Donald Trump is inevitable, that he will consolidate power, that he is inherently going to win, and thus you need to go along, get along, protect yourself. And it says, actually, maybe the millions and millions of people in the streets who are collectively coming out and standing up for democracy, maybe they're onto something. Maybe they're powering what comes next. Maybe they're going to win, and I need to make some different decisions.
I think that's such a great point, and also would want to add onto that so much of, I think, the willingness of Trump's accomplices in Congress, in the House, the Senate, his administration, that's buoyed. Their support for him, their blind support for him, is buoyed by the fact that they viewed his election win as this huge mandate.
Yes.
And this pokes a hole in that idea that Donald Trump has total control or this massive mandate. And so when you have 4, 5, 6, 7 million people taking to the streets, suddenly the ease with which they'll defer to him, blindly defer to him, kind of dissipates a little bit, because suddenly the biggest voice in the room is no longer Donald Trump's. He's no longer the scariest monster that they're facing. Now you've got millions of Americans taking to the streets, not just in these big blue bastions, but also small cities across the country, also in states like Idaho, in states like Oklahoma, states like Texas. And that becomes something that they have to consider when they're deciding whether or not they want to blindly defer to Trump when he does his next egregious or illegal activity.
1,000%. This is the no kings era, not the Trump era. Trump is just living in it. And
Yeah.
all the institutions that get used to that basic reality will then change their behavior. We'll have fewer Paul Weiss law firms. We'll have fewer Columbia universities.
Yeah.
We'll have fewer CBS Newses. They will say, oh, shoot, this era is temporary. I got to get on the right side of history. Otherwise, I might be on the wrong side of history and that will hurt me in the future. That is part of the goal of this. The other part of the goal is to recruit tons of people to be part of this in the real world on the ground. We got to call tonight, Tuesday night, with 140,000 people who are joining to learn about what we can do on the ground next. This is the biggest follow-up call we've ever done in the history of Indivisible, in the history of No Kings. We're excited for it because there are big things coming next.
I think one more point that I think is worth noting is there are a lot of people who can't go out and march, or who are too afraid to go out and march, and rightfully so. As Donald Trump continues to deploy ICE into communities across the country, there are people who don't have the luxury of being able to go out in the streets and present themselves or put themselves in a situation where they may get rounded up and sent to some foreign gulag or deported out of the country. And for a lot of the people who came out to march, they gave voice to people who didn't have the opportunity to be there. I mean, there are very real reasons right now, as we've all seen online, why people may be afraid to go out onto the streets or face these goons that Trump's deployed. And so to have 7 million people kind of serve as the voice for a large community in this country who's been rendered voiceless, I think is a powerful point that's worth pointing out as well. You know, we've heard a lot about this idea of the 3.5% rule, and this was, I believe, Erica Chenoweth's idea that popular movements that contain more than 3.5% of a population, so in our case 11 million people, have never failed to achieve whatever goals they're seeking out to achieve. And so how are you thinking about that number as you continue to move forward in your plans to organize, whether it's the next No King's Day protest, if and when that happens, or just the next iteration of what this organized movement looks like?
We've spoken with Erica a lot over the last several months. We've worked closely with them. Their research has been influential in our own strategic planning. And I think if you talk to Erica directly about this, what you would hear is what we often say: 3.5% is a good guideline. It is not a magical number. There's no
Yeah.
referee in the sky that once you get 11 to 12 million people out in the streets, suddenly, boom, you've won.
Yeah.
Democracy is saved. Fascism is over. Congratulations. That's not going to happen. And nor is it the case that even within the context of Erica's work, is it that if you get people out on one day, suddenly you've won. The 3.5% refers to consistent on the ground opposition to the authoritarian overreach. So yes, in our heads, 3.5%, or in the US context, 11 to 12 million people, we're shooting to get bigger and bigger and head towards that. But we're under no illusion that this is all suddenly going to be over one day. This requires everybody in America to treat democracy as a participatory sport. That's how we get over authoritarian overreach. We think it's attainable, and the reason why we think it's attainable is because we've gone from 3 to 5 to 7 million in the course of a few months. We've got a few months to go.
Last question here. There has been, among the litany of pushback from Republicans, and you named a bunch of excuses, these tenuous excuses that they've landed on, whether it's, whether the protest didn't happen, whether it did happen, but whatever excuse they've landed on for that hour of the day. But one thing that they've been saying is that this whole thing was funded by some outside entity. And so there are a lot of Republicans in positions of power right now that want to use the federal government to be able to investigate where funding came from, or even this idea that the people who came out to protest, to make their voices heard, were paid. Can I have your reaction to this general idea that the only way to have gotten people out to protest the least popular president in modern American history, in the history of this country, was to pay them?
Well, look, we've faced smears like this literally since before we were an organization. I remember in January, February, March of 2017, literally before we had anyone on staff, when we were paying our volunteers with pizza, Republicans were saying there can't possibly be all these people turning up to town halls just because they're angry about the attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They must be paid. It must be George Soros who's doing this. I remember talking to CNN reporters being like, we literally don't have an organization. We're just a bunch of volunteers doing this. And they've continued to do it. It is a classic smear where they attempt to dispute what is real, broad, deeply felt sentiment across the country as a manifestation of AstroTurf or paid protest. This is a strategy that literally never works because they're obviously wrong. You cannot get 7 million people out via some kind of like secret surreptitious move. It is, I should also note, a wildly and obviously anti-Semitic smear that they are, regularly launch at OSF and George Soros and at us ourselves. And it's just like it never works because the reality is that it's a really bad political strategy to dismiss millions and millions of regular people who are incredibly concerned about where this country is going, so concerned that they gave up their Saturday to all collectively come out together and say, we can just ignore that. They would be better served by taking really seriously that they have provoked a massive grassroots backlash to what they are doing, that it is in every corner of this country, and that they actually should adjust course. They won't do that, but that would be the smarter strategy.
Well, I mean, this is also being handed down by a political party whose leader posted a video of him dumping shit on those same protesters. So not exactly a surprise. As they say, the fish rots from the head. To that point, thank you both so much for taking the time today. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for organizing, being the ones to step up and help give voice to so many people who very clearly had something to say this weekend. Looking forward to what you all do next. Thank you so much.
Thank you for covering what's on the ground.